Greetings, I'm Bill Kladke, and I'd like to welcome you to today's edition of Neighborhood Beat. Our show today looks at fair housing in Maryland. Our guests are Rob Strupp, who's the Executive Director of Baltimore Neighborhoods, and Nokomis Johns, who's Senior Tenant Landlord Counselor for Baltimore Neighborhoods. First of all, Rob, could you please tell us what the mission of Baltimore Neighborhoods is, please?
Thank you for having us, by the way, Bill. BNI's mission is justice in housing, and we carry out our mission through two core programs, fair housing and tenant landlord program.
Great.
Advice.
Okay, thank you, thank you. And Nokomis, what do you do for Baltimore Neighborhoods?
I'm the Senior Tenant Landlord Counselor, so I supervise the Tenant Landlord Program, which includes the Tenant Landlord Hotline.
Great, thank you, thank you. Rob, let's talk more about Baltimore Neighborhoods. Baltimore Neighborhoods has been around for a long time.
Yes, it has. Actually, BNI was founded in 1959, so it was a full decade before the passage of the Fair Housing Act in 1968. And initially, its vision was to promote desegregation of Baltimore. In fact, one of its founders was James Rouse, who, of course, we all know as being one of the developers of the Harbor Place in Columbia, Maryland. And his vision was to allow people to live where they choose to live.
Yeah, and that is still a partial reality 60 years later.
That's right. We still struggle with opportunity and choice for all people to live where they want to, and affordable housing is part of fair housing very much because people are struggling to be able to live where the good schools are, where the jobs are, where the transportation is, and we look to help with that.
Yeah, that's great. And I guess tenant landlord counseling is very definitely a part of that, Nokomis.
Yes, it is. It's definitely a major part of the fair housing and making sure that people have a fair choice in where they want to live.
What does tenant landlord counseling involve?
Basically, what happens is when people call into our hotline at BNI, they call with a question. Normally that could be about failure to pay rent. You know, maybe they got a notice in the mail about having to go to court about a rent issue. Or it could be that the landlord failed to turn their security deposit after the end of the tenancy. Different legal questions are what we can answer. The counselors are thoroughly trained on the laws, and we're not attorneys, but we can answer questions about the law.
How can somebody get in touch with you folks?
They can call our 800 number. It's 1-800-487-6007. We're open 9 to 5, Monday through Friday.
Okay, great, great. Thank you, thank you. And for Baltimore Neighborhoods, how can someone get in touch with, learn more about BNI?
Well, they can contact us at 243-4468. That's 410, of course. Also, our website is www.bni-maryland.org.
Great, great. Let's talk about your various services, because I know Baltimore Neighborhoods, or BNI, as I guess most people refer to it, is involved in a lot of different things.
We really are. Housing justice is broad these days, and we, in addition to our tenant landlord program that Nokomis has described, our fair housing program conducts education and outreach. We receive complaints from people who believe they may have been discriminated against or just want to know if perhaps something that's happened to them was discriminatory, and we can provide information on that. We produce and provide to the courts and other government agencies free of charge tenant landlord guides of the laws, both state laws and local laws, and we also sell that along with other documents like leases, for example, and they're very nominal charge, but we're a nonprofit, and so fundraising is important.
Right, right, and you folks are the experts. I tell folks that I refer a lot of folks your way, and your various guides and information they're basically it.
Well, thank you for that. And of course, one of the challenges is that while we see and think of discrimination and in the traditional sense of the protected classes, the federal protected classes, today not only do the means of discrimination have evolved, but the actual classes, protected classes, is changing too. We see a lot of scams that target the elderly, which is a protected class in some of the local jurisdictions. We see scams in the sense that certain companies are sprouting up ostensibly to help landlords and tenants find decent housing and decent decent landlords and decent tenants, and yet they do so in such a way that they're actually scamming somebody out of their money, and so that's all part of what we do as well.
Oh, what a shame! What a shame. As long as we're on the subject of scams, could you, for the benefit of our viewers, give us some ideas of what scams they should watch out for?
Well, they crop up so quickly it's almost like whack-a-mole, because if you can go after somebody for one thing and they'll sprout up somewhere else. But a couple of things that I've just seen recently in the way of rental scams were third parties that would rent apartments for a huge fee for somebody with bad credit, and then they would be the landlord essentially, but rent the apartment from an apartment owner. The name of the actual occupant is not on the lease, which poses a lot of problems. And then another area of scam we've seen has to do with companies that are coming up that are saying they're going to help landlords find decent tenants, but they're conditioning the tenancies on unreasonable grounds of income requirements and other things like that.
What a shame, what a shame. I guess you hear some of that stuff too, Nokomis.
Yes, yes, we do. Then we also hear, particularly when it comes to foreclosure, sometimes there are different people who come about claiming that they're the owner of the property, misleading some tenants, and causing a lot of frustration and thinking that they are going to be evicted immediately, different things like that.
What are some warning signs, Nokomis, for things like that? Do you know?
Possible warning signs for thinking you're possibly going to be scammed is if you get a notice that says that you're about to be evicted, and it's a foreclosure process. If that process is just started, then that's not true. Tenants have rights to possibly remain in the property for at least an additional 90 days, or maybe even have their lease fulfilled.
Great, thanks. And I guess you would advise folks to contact B&I if they have any questions about this.
Yes, we can inform them of the process and help them find out where they are in the particular foreclosure process in their property.
Yeah, yeah, because folks do have rights.
Yes, they do.
And folks should learn their rights from somebody else other than from somebody who tends to or can benefit from that, huh?
Right, so that they're not going to the landlord or the property manager to find out what their rights are because they're looking out for their interests. They should know, what's really going on with the situation.
Yeah, I guess that's a good thing I tell folks anyway is try to figure out who can benefit from your situation and then don't ask them what your rights are because there might be a possibility they might be a little biased.
Right.
It's really better to call us and ask the question than it is to find yourself having been victimized or treated unfairly in some way. We can hopefully try and prevent that.
Yeah, yeah. But I guess there's other things that in fair housing that it's tough to prevent, that are really structural problems in fair housing, and that's, I know Baltimore Neighborhoods is involved and has been involved for a number of years in trying to work on some of those, and you have too, in your various guises over the years.
Well, thank you, yes. I mean, we are very concerned again about the lack of affordable housing, which essentially prevents people from relocating. And the term that's used for that, of course, is mobility, and the ability for somebody who lives in the city to move to one of the counties or to live near a transportation line, or something along those lines, because housing tends to be very expensive where those conveniences exist. So we're looking to promote more affordable housing, which would create more diverse communities.
Yes, indeed, indeed. But it's tough to do that.
Well, it took centuries to create the problem that we're in, so we recognize it's going to take time to make the necessary repairs.
Yeah.
But we have to be focused on making those repairs, and so far I think while we're making advances, we aren't all on the same page.
Yeah, the issue of affordable housing is something that seems to be something that a lot of people say we need more of, but how can we get that done?
I think there are more creative tax incentives, for example, and other credits, what have you, that can be made available to housing providers. And of course, housing providers are home builders, landlords, as well as the real estate industry itself. But more incentives to provide more mixed use and mixed price development and housing would make communities more diverse, more sustainable, and everybody would have a chance to live there.
Yeah, and diversity, Nokomis?
Oh, and yes, and also one thing that we do in the tenant landlord program is also outreach, going to speak to more community groups and helping people get informed of their rights. Sometimes when the smaller people can put more pressure on the system, that can help effectively make a lot of change when people know their rights. And also maybe even working with code enforcement and making sure that low-income housing is properly code enforced, as well as, you know, upper income housing, and making sure that the system is just being fair and equal to all income levels.
Affordable housing has to be habitable housing too.
Yes.
So
Right,
it's not just
right.
a question of, well, you can live in this property if it's a dump. You know, we don't want that.
Yeah, I mean, affordable housing really isn't good housing if it's not in good condition.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. The issue of mortgage lending discrimination has been in the news, and the whole mortgage dilemma has been something this country's been fighting now for a couple of years in an active way, but discrimination and bias makes it even worse, doesn't it?
Well, that's right, and there have been study after study that have shown that the toxic mortgages, some of the really predatory loans that were out there, were targeted to protected class, to minorities, to Latinos, and so we're continuing to see the consequences of that in significant loss of home ownership rates, for example, in those groups versus white neighborhoods. And we're seeing that now we're looking at how that is happening in the outcomes of some of these loan issues, some of the wrongful foreclosures that have taken place. For example, one of the problems has been that the lenders have not been forthcoming with where they have done whatever relief or provided whatever relief that they have given, and so I and BNI have been very vocal about trying to get more geographic and demographic information about the homeowners. And so if a homeowner believes that they may not have gotten satisfaction from their lender on the basis of discrimination, we would love to hear from them.
Yeah, yeah, and the system needs to be transparent to protect everybody's rights.
It does, and that's been a part of the problem, is that it hasn't been, and of course that I feel has been by design, and so we want to try and break that.
Yeah, yeah. What can our viewers do to help?
Well, again, if you feel that you or someone you know may have been the victim of some discrimination, whether it be in lending or in housing itself, let us know. There are some measures that are ongoing at the moment with regards to the mortgage lending part of this that we were just talking about. Congressman Cummings has introduced a bill which would require more reporting of geographic and demographic data. Some of the attorneys general around the country, not yet here in Maryland, but some of the attorneys general are looking at whether or not the settlement procedures have actually been followed to the letter, and that may give an opportunity for more information. So if you contact your congressman, if you contact the Attorney General's office, you may be able to persuade them to join the bandwagon on some of these issues.
Great. I guess someone can find out more information by contacting you?
Absolutely, 410-243-4468. Also, Strupp at bni-maryland.org.
Great, and that's on the website too?
And that's on the website as well, yes.
Great, great. Let's talk a little bit more, Nokomis, about the tenant-landlord counseling that you do, because I know that you've been involved for about a year at BNI, right?
Actually, I've been there for almost 9.5 years, working to help tenants and landlords. We do support both sides and make sure that both are aware of what their rights and responsibilities are.
And that's actually very unique, Bill, because we are impartial with regards to our advice on tenant-landlord issues. So a landlord calls and wants to know, whether they can do this or they can do that. We can give them that information just the same as we would give impartial advice.
That's a great service. That is a wonderful service that I wish more jurisdictions were appreciative of.
Thank you. We do too.
Because I know you do that across the state.
That's right, we do, and we receive now about 20,000 inquiries a year between our calls and our website, information requests throughout the state of Maryland for the tenant landlord services.
That's great. Nokomis, in 9.5 years, you've seen trends in in complaints too, complaints and issues, huh?
Yeah, our top complaints on the hotline probably range from, the biggest is failure to pay rent. Landlords and tenants call about failure to pay rent. About over a third of our calls are landlords. We also get calls about security deposits, rent escrow, and proper notice. A lot of people don't understand that you have to give proper written notice to end the tenancy, which can vary by jurisdiction.
Let's underline that.
Yes.
Yes, yes. That you have to give proper written notice to end a tenancy.
Yes.
And which means that if somebody tells you orally or any other way,
And then you
it
don't
doesn't
have to-
exist.
Right.
Legally, it doesn't exist.
Exactly.
Do you find that you get the certain times of the year you get more calls than others?
That I have not noticed as much. We get our volume of calls will increase during the summer months when people tend to be renting more. More so the winter months, we don't get as many calls because people aren't moving as much, aren't moving around. They're looking to stay where they are.
And I know that a certain amount of the calls you get are actually discrimination issues, huh?
Yes, we do refer some of our calls to our Fair Housing Department, to make sure that the caller is getting the best service that they need. So.
Right. What kinds of discrimination issues are getting prevalent now, Rob?
Well, our complaints are coming pretty much mirroring the Department of Housing and Urban Development fair housing complaints, in that we're seeing the lead be familial status, which means having children under the age of 18, disability, and then a race and national origin. So it used to be, of course, that race and national origin was the lead reason for somebody to feel that they've been discriminated against. But that's fallen a little bit down below the other two.
Familial status, what kinds of...
Well, if somebody has, any number of children under the age of 18, and they're finding resistance from their landlord in being able to rent an apartment or buy a home, for example, or get a loan, that could be discrimination under the fair housing law.
Or even if they're telling them maybe to rent on the lower level.
Right. It might be it might not be a refusal to rent, but a steering to a particular location, the lower level. Sometimes it's we'll put you in the back of the complex, or something along those lines. And it might be that you have 3 children and you want to rent a 2-bedroom, and the landlord says no, you have to rent a 3, or which you might not be able to afford. And so those kinds of misdirections by housing providers can be discrimination.
So in other words, if you have 3 children, you can rent a 2-bedroom.
Sure, absolutely. So you shouldn't be, if you're being turned down, then you should let us know. And the other issue with regards, it's important to note when we're talking about disability, is that if you have a medical need for a service animal, whether it be the traditional expectation, we're talking about a dog for seeing eye purposes or something like that, or it might be for some other reason, for emotional reasons or what have you, those animals do not apply, the pet policies do not apply for that. The service animals are not pets. So if a housing provider says, I'm sorry, we don't take pets, that's not a pet. And if you're getting resistance, then you should let us know.
Yeah, and usually when somebody has an issue like that, a phone call from BNI is enough.
Very often it is. We'll let them know that you're not meeting the reasonable accommodation requirements of the fair housing laws, and that'll take care of it. Sometimes there's forms that need to be filled out, and the question is this some sort of resistance effort, or is it reasonable? And that's the test. And so we need to see what the reason for resistance or objection is.
I get some calls from folks sometimes that don't know what they're legally required to provide to prove that they have a disability. What would you say to them?
Well, it depends on the disability. Certainly, if you are visually impaired, sight impaired, and you're coming in and that's physically obvious, then some sort of a request for documentation or request for something might be unreasonable. If it's something that's not apparent, then you could ask for a letter from a doctor, for example. That would be reasonable.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you.
Sure.
And is that the kind of thing you run into too, Nokomis?
Yes, well, we do get some situations like that where we'll refer them to the Fair Housing Department to maybe even request a letter be sent to the landlord or to the service to just address the issue, that maybe encourage them to understand what the person's rights are as far as getting a reasonable accommodation or a modification.
What do you see as what have you been finding in terms of major issues from landlords? You said about a third of them are lack of payment of rent. Yeah,
the biggest thing is failure to pay rent and understanding the procedure, understanding that there is a court process that you have to go through to remove someone from the property. It can be very frustrating, especially we get calls from people who maybe have just invited someone into their home for a temporary period of time and think that they can just remove them. There's a court procedure under state law for that as well.
So in an owner-occupied house, someone needs to go by those procedures too.
Right, always.
Right.
And so even landlords sometimes misunderstand that they can just evict a tenant without a court procedure. And we recently went to Annapolis to support legislation. We actually had one of our callers support legislation for non-judicial evictions where her landlord locked her out of the property even though she had a right to a court process. She was in the process of moving during a hurricane and the landlord locked her out when she was trying to get her things and her really expensive items from her husband's business. So we do help support legislation as well, which is another way that citizens can be empowered by supporting legislative action to improve the laws.
And that can be legislation at the state level, of course, in Annapolis, or even at the county council level. So we work with mayors and we work with the county councils around the country, around the state too.
Yeah, I guess what I try to tell folks is they need to recognize that almost everything they do in this country is a legal act, and that it has implications. If you rent somebody something, it's a legal act.
That's right.
And there are laws that pertain to the rights and the procedures of the tenant and the landlord.
That's right. It's a give and take, and if you want to be in business, there are certain risks of being in business as well as the obvious benefits of choosing to be in that business. And you need to comply with the laws that regulate it.
Yeah. Let's talk about, for the next, we've got about 3 minutes left. Let's talk about what needs to be done and how our viewers can help.
Well, from a standpoint of fair housing enforcement, one of the things that BNI is constantly looking for are testers. One of the things that we do is we go around to housing providers, and again, that's not necessarily landlords or home builders. It could be other providers in the real estate industry, to test them, mystery shop them, if you will, to see if they are compliant. And we're always looking for testers throughout the state, so if anybody's interested in being trained to be a tester, we would love for them to contact us.
And they contact you?
Through the website, www.bni-maryland.org. They can call me at 410-243-4468 or email rstrupp@bni-maryland.org.
And I know that you're very accommodating for people's schedules and all that?
Absolutely. We can do this. This can be done during the evenings. It can be done on weekends. We definitely work with folks on that as well as on the training part of it. But certainly it's another opportunity for people to, it's volunteer, but I mean there's a stipend for cost, gasoline and things like that.
Right, great. And I know in terms of legislatively, be nice to have source of income added.
Yes, BNI is very interested in the source of income measures that has been introduced over the years in the state, and that the confusion with that is it's not just a Section 8 voucher legislation. It includes VA benefits, Social Security, disability, if somebody's on a retirement pension from having been a teacher all their life or whatever benefit it might be like that. All of that, the idea is that a landlord or housing provider should not discriminate against you because of where, as long as it's lawful, where your income comes from. And yet we see that resistance to, for example, Section 8 holders living in this neighborhood or that neighborhood, and we're definitely anxious to put an end to that discrimination.
How can folks help?
Again, contact your legislators, contact us to let us know you want to support it, because we'll be back in Annapolis. And even at the local level right now, we're pushing for local ordinances to combat discrimination on the basis of source of income.
Yeah, source of income doesn't just mean Section 8, it also means VA, and it means
that's right. It's
all of those other things, which is, and you see instances of that, right? Where landlords won't accept VA.
We see it in advertising, we see it in practice, and there are a number of websites where you can go to and see what kind of discriminatory advertising is being practiced. And we use those as examples when we do the education and outreach, for example, that Nokomis was talking about.
Yeah, that's a shame. That's a shame. Folks should if you can afford something, you should be able to afford it.
And actually, somebody who's receiving their income from an annuity or Section 8 or one of these VA benefits, for example, is actually a better risk than somebody on a salary who could be laid off or furloughed or sequestered. That entitlement is going to be there. That salary may not.
To use an old phrase, the iron rice bowl.
There you go.
Yeah. The iron rice bowl provides the rice.
That's right.
Yeah, it's short-sighted and frankly,
it is discriminatory.
And it is
discriminatory. It is.
Yeah, and it's discriminatory because it's not only it's targeting folks that have a lower income, but it's also targeting folks that might be more proportionately minority or proportionately of one type or the other. But it's discriminatory on base.
That's right.
Yeah. We're just about out of time. Could you give us that contact information one more time, please, Rob?
410-243-4468 or www.bni-maryland.org or rstrupp@bni-maryland.org.
STRUPP.
That's right. Thank you.
Great. And Nokomis for the tenant landlord hotline?
People can dial 1-800-487-6007 from anywhere in the state of Maryland.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Unfortunately for Neighborhood Beat, that's all we have time for today. I want to thank our guests, Rob Strupp, Esquire, who's Executive Director of Baltimore Neighborhoods, for being our guest today. Keep up your good work for all of us, Rob.
Thank you.
And Nokomis Johns, who's Senior Tenant Landlord Counselor for Baltimore Neighborhoods. Thank you, Nokomis.
Thank you.
Keep positive out there.
Thanks, I will.
And for Neighborhood Beat, I want to thank you for tuning in. Let's try to be a good neighbor out there in all of our neighborhoods, and we'll see you next time.